Far Away and Long Ago. Chapter 16. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Far Away and Long Ago by W. H. Hudson. Chapter 16. A Serpent Mystery. It was not until after the episode related in the last chapter, and the discovery that a serpent was not necessarily dangerous to human beings, therefore a creature to be destroyed at sight and pounded to a pulp lest it should survive and escape before sunset, that I began to appreciate its unique beauty and singularity. Then, somewhat later, I met with an adventure which produced another and a new feeling in me, that sense of something supernatural in the serpent, which appears to have been universal among peoples in a primitive state of culture, and still survives in some barbarous and semi-barbarous countries, and in others, like Hindustan, which have inherited an ancient civilization. The snakes I was familiar with as a boy up to this time were all of comparatively small size, the largest being the snake with a cross described in an earlier chapter. The biggest specimen I have ever found of this ophidian was under 4 feet in length, but the body was thick, as in all the pit vipers. Then there was the green and black snake described in the last chapter, an inhabitant of the house, which seldom exceeded 3 feet, and another of the same genus, the most common snake in the country. One seldom took a walk or a ride on the plain without seeing it. It was in size and shape like our common grass snake, and was formerly classed by naturalists in the same genus, Coronella. It is quite beautiful, the pale greenish-gray body mottled with black, being decorated with 2 parallel bright red lines extending from the neck to the tip of the fine-pointed tail. Of the others, the most interesting was a still smaller snake, brightly colored, the belly with alternate bands of crimson and bright blue. This snake was regarded by everyone as exceedingly venomous and most dangerous on account of its irascible temper and habit of coming at you and hissing loudly, its head and neck raised, and striking at your legs. But this was all swagger on the snake's part. It was not venomous at all, and could do no more harm by biting than a young dove in its nest by pulling itself up and striking at an intrusive hand with its soft beak. Then one day I came upon a snake quite unknown to me. I had never heard of the existence of such a snake in our parts, and I imagined its appearance would have strongly affected any one in any land, even in those abounding in big snakes. The spot, too, in our plantation where I found it, served to make its singular appearance more impressive. There existed at that time a small piece of waste ground about half an acre in extent, where there were no trees and where nothing planted by man would grow. It was at the far end of the plantation, adjoining the thicket of fennel and the big red willow tree on the edge of the moat described in another chapter. This ground had been plowed and dug up again and again, and planted with trees and shrubs of various kinds, which were supposed to grow on any soil, but they had always languished and died, and no wonder, since the soil was a hard white clay resembling china clay. But although trees refused to grow there, it was always clothed in a vegetation of its own. All the hardiest weeds were there, and covered the entire barren area to the depth of a man's knees. The weeds had thin, wiry stalks and small, sickly leaves and flowers, and would die each summer long before their time. This barren piece of ground had a great attraction for me as a small boy, and I visited it daily and would roam about it among the miserable half-dead weeds, with the sun-baked clay showing between the brown stalks, as if it delighted me as much as the alfalfa field, blue and fragrant in its flowering time and swarming with butterflies. One hot day in December I had been standing perfectly still for a few minutes among the dry weeds when a slight rustling sound came from near my feet, and glancing down I saw the head and neck of a large black serpent moving slowly past me. In a moment or two the flat head was lost to sight among the close-growing weeds, but the long body continued moving slowly by, so slowly that it hardly appeared to move, and as the creature must have been not less than 6 feet long, and probably more, it took a very long time. While I stood thrilled with terror, not daring to make the slightest movement, gazing down upon it. Although so long it was not a thick snake, and as it moved on over the white ground it had the appearance of a coal-black current flowing past me, a current not of water or of other liquid, but of some such element as quicksilver moving on in a rope-like stream. At last it vanished, and turning I fled the ground, thinking that never again would I venture into or near that frightfully dangerous spot in spite of its fascination. Nevertheless, I did venture. The image of that black mysterious serpent was always in my mind from the moment of waking in the morning till I fell asleep at night. Yet I never said a word about the snake to any one. It was my secret, and I knew it was a dangerous secret, but I did not want to be told not to visit that spot again, and I simply could not keep away from it. The desire to look again at that strange being was too strong. I began to visit the place again day after day, and would hang around about the borders of the barren, weedy ground, watching and listening, and still no black serpent appeared. Then one day I ventured, though in fear and trembling, to go right in among the weeds, and still finding nothing, began to advance step by step till I was right in the middle of the weedy ground, and stood there a long time, waiting and watching. All I wanted was just to see it once more, and I had made up my mind that immediately on its appearance, if it did appear, I would take to my heels. It was when standing in this central spot that once again that slight rustling sound, like that of a few days before, reached my straining sense and sent an icy chill down my back. And there, within 6 inches of my toes, appeared the black head and neck, followed by the long, seemingly endless body. I dared not move, since to have attempted flight might have been fatal. The weeds were thinnest here, and the black head and slow-moving black coil could be followed by the eye for a little distance. About a yard from me there was a hole in the ground about the circumference of a breakfast cup at the top, and into this hole the serpent put his head, and slowly drew himself in, while I stood waiting until the whole body to the tip of the tail had vanished and all danger was over. I had seen my wonderful creature, my black serpent, unlike any serpent in the land, and the excitement following the first thrill of terror was still on me, but I was conscious of an element of delight in it, and I would not now resolve not to visit the spot again. Still I was in fear, and kept away 3 or 4 days. Thinking about the snake, I formed the conclusion that the hole he had taken refuge in was his den, where he lived, that he was often out roaming about in search of prey, and could hear footsteps at a considerable distance, and that when I walked about in that spot my footsteps disturbed him and caused him to go straight to his hole to hide himself from a possible danger. It struck me that if I went to the middle of the ground and stationed myself near the hole, I would be sure to see him. It would indeed be difficult to see him any other way, since one could never know in which direction he had gone out to seek for food. But no, it was too dangerous. The serpent might come upon me unawares, and would probably resent always finding a boy hanging about his den. Still I could not endure to think that I had seen the last of him, and day after day I continued to haunt the spot, and going a few yards into the little weedy wilderness would stand and peer, and at the slightest rustling sound of an insect or falling leaf would experience a thrill of fearful joy, and still the black majestical creature failed to appear. One day, in my eagerness and impatience, I pushed my way through the crowded weeds right to the middle of the ground, and gazed with a mixed delight and fear at the hole. Would he find me here, as on a former occasion? Would he come? I held my breath. I strained my sight and hearing in vain. The hope and fear of his appearance gradually died out, and I left the place bitterly disappointed, and walked to a spot about 50 yards away, where mulberry trees grew on the slope of the mound inside the moat. Looking up into the masses of big clustering leaves over my head, I spied a bat hanging suspended from a twig. The bats, I must explain, in that part of the world, that illimitable plain where there were no caverns and old buildings and other dark places to hide in by day, are not so intolerant of the bright light as in other lands. They do not come forth until evening, but by day they are content to hitch themselves to the twig of a tree under a thick cluster of leaves and rest there until it is dark. Gazing up at this bat suspended under a big green leaf, wrapped in his black and buff-colored wings as a mantle, I forgot my disappointment, forgot the serpent, and was so entirely taken up with the bat that I paid no attention to a sensation like a pressure or a dull pain on the instep of my right foot. Then the feeling of pressure increased and was very curious, and was as if I had a heavy object like a crowbar lying across my foot. And at length I looked down at my feet, and to my amazement and horror spied the great black snake slowly drawing its long coil across my instep. I dared not move, but gazed down, fascinated with the sight of that glistening black cylindrical body drawn so slowly over my foot. He had come out of the moat, which was riddled at the sides with rat-holes, and had most probably been there hunting for rats, when my wandering footsteps disturbed him and sent him home to his den, and making straight for it, as his way was, he came to my foot, and instead of going round, drew himself over it. After the first spasm of terror, I knew I was perfectly safe, that he would not turn upon me so long as I remained quiescent, and would presently be gone from sight. And that was my last sight of him. In vain I watched and waited for him to appear on many subsequent days, but that last encounter had left me a sense of a mysterious being, dangerous on occasion as when attacked or insulted, and able in some cases to inflict death with a sudden blow, but harmless and even friendly or beneficent toward those who regarded it with kindly and reverent feelings in place of hatred. It is in part the feeling of the Hindu with regard to the cobra which inhabits his house and may one day accidentally cause his death, but is not to be persecuted. Possibly something of that feeling about serpents has survived in me, but in time, as my curiosity about all wild creatures grew, as I looked more on them with the naturalist's eye, the mystery of the large black snake pressed for an answer. It seemed impossible to believe that any species of snake of large size and black as jet or anthracite coal in color would exist in any inhabited country without being known. Yet no person I interrogated on the subject had ever seen or heard of such an ophidian. The only conclusion appeared to be that this snake was the sole one of its kind in the land. Eventually I heard of the phenomenon of melanism in animals, less rare in snakes, perhaps, than in animals of other classes, and I was satisfied that the problem was partly solved. My serpent was a black individual of a species of some other color, but it was not one of our common species, not one of those I knew. It was not a thick, blunt-bodied serpent like our venomous pit viper, our largest snake, and though in shape it conformed to our two common harmless species, it was twice as big as the biggest specimens I had ever seen of them. Then I recalled that 2 years before my discovery of the black snake, our house had been visited by a large unknown snake which measured 2 or 3 inches over 6 feet, and was similar in form to my black serpent. The color of this strange and unwelcome visitor was a pale greenish gray, with numerous dull black mottlings in small spots. The story of its appearance is perhaps worth giving. It happened that I had a baby sister who could just toddle about on 2 legs, having previously gone on all 4s. One midsummer day she was taken up and put on a rug in the shade of a tree 25 yards from the sitting-room door, and left alone there to amuse herself with her dolls and toys. After half an hour or so she appeared at the door of the sitting-room, where her mother was at work, and standing there with wide-open astonished eyes, and moving her hand and arm as to point to the place where she came from, she uttered the mysterious word cuckoo. It was a wonderful word which the South American mother teaches her child from the moment it begins to toddle, and is useful in a desert and sparsely inhabited country where biting, stinging, and other injurious creatures are common. For babies, when they learn to crawl and to walk, are eager to investigate, and have no natural sense of danger. Take as an illustration the case of the gigantic hairy brown spider, which is excessively abundant in summer, and has the habit of wandering about as if always seeking something. something it cannot find, it knows not what. And in these wanderings it comes in the open door and rambles about the room. At the sight of such a creature the baby is snatched up with the cry of cuckoo, and the intruder slain with a broom or other weapon and thrown out. Cuckoo means dangerous, and the terrified gestures and expression of the nurse or mother when using the word sink into the infant mind, and when that sound or word is heard there is an instant response, as in the case of a warning note or cry uttered by a parent bird which causes the young to fly away or crouch down and hide. The child's gestures and the word used caused her mother to run to the spot where it had been left in the shade, and to her horror she saw there a huge serpent coiled up in the middle of the rug. Her cries brought my father on the scene, and seizing a big stick he promptly dispatched the snake. The child, said everybody, had had a marvelous escape, as she had never previously seen a snake and could not intuitively know it was dangerous or cuckoo. It was conjectured that she had made some gesture or attempt to push the snake away when it came to the rug, and that it had reared its head and struck viciously at her. Recalling this incident, I concluded that this unknown serpent, which had been killed because it wanted to share my baby sister's rug, and my black serpent were one and the same species. Possibly they had been mates, and that they had strayed a distance away from their native place, or else were the last survivors of a colony of their kind in our plantation. It was not until 12 or 14 years later that I discovered that it was even as I had conjectured. At a distance of about 40 miles from my home, or rather from the home of my boyhood where I no longer lived, I found a snake that was new to me, the Philodrus scotti of naturalists, a not uncommon Argentine snake, and recognized it as the same species as the one found coiled up on my little sister's rug, and presumably as my mysterious black serpent. Some of the specimens which I measured exceeded 6 feet in length. End of chapter 16.